Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 57.
You may have noticed recently, vinyl records are making a comeback.
The growing trend has newer artists releasing some of their own music on vinyl and has some people looking to dust off some old memories.
It's not just vinyl. Headlines in recent years have celebrated the surprising comeback of other analog technologies too, instant print and film cameras finding their way into the hands of Gen Z, even paper notebooks flying off the shelves. Why, in a world where digital dominates, are people gravitating back to these physical analog experiences? Despite their limitations, and maybe because of them, these old-school options are thriving in a way few predicted. What does this tell us about what people truly value in a hyper-connected world? Why do analog experiences hold such unique power? What does it reveal about the balance between the digital and the tangible in our lives? To help us understand, we're joined by David Sachs, award-winning journalist and best-selling author of The Revenge of Analog and The Future is Analog. David has explored how these physical technologies are reclaiming space in our lives and what it says about our humanity in an increasingly digital age. Stick around to discover why the analog revival is capturing hearts, minds, and even our wallets. Let's get our old school groove on right now. Well, thank you very much for making time for this. This is awesome.
Of course, my pleasure.
Yeah, so in your book, you argue that the analog world is making a comeback in many areas like vinyl records, handwritten notes. And so why do you think these analog experiences are so enduring, even as digital technology becomes more pervasive?
I think it's because digital technology has become more pervasive, right? Because what we're talking about is not a return to the way things were, in 1980, right, prior to personal computers. It's really what we're talking about here is kind of a renewed growth of physical technologies, physical goods, physical spaces, analog spaces that had been declining for a decade or more, and all of a sudden, really over the past decade or 15 years, they started growing again. And it really kind of surprised most people who had written them off as dead. And I think the thing that links all of these things together, whether we're talking about film and cameras, whether we're talking about, vinyl records and music, whether we're talking about paper notebooks or even, print books or bookstores, is the physicality of it, right? The non-digital nature of these things. That is the sort of heart of the enduring appeal of all these things, because the very thing that digital promised to replace and improve upon is the thing that gives these things value when everything else is digital, when the sort of the standard, the default is digital.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's almost like a, it's cool to be analog just because it's unique too. There's a little bit of that, I think.
Well, I think that's part of it too. So there's a couple, we can unpack it, right? There's a couple different things there. So one is this sort of physical tactile element, right? Like the benefit of these things, the attraction of them, the appeal, the thing that's the differentiator is the sort of built-in hardware of the physical thing, right? So I don't know, pick one of the technologies, pick an analog thing. What's the one that you like the most, David? What's the one that appeals to you or calls to you?
Well, one I can really relate to is sort of the visceral part of vinyl records.
Right. So what is a vinyl record, right? It's literally like the sound waves of music, or, could be poetry, I guess, pressed into a melted piece of plastic. Like it's a physical representation of that sound wave. Those are the grooves, right? And it's just like waffle sandwiched in a sort of press of plastic vinyl. That's what it is on it, right? You can only play that, this physical thing that's kind of heavy and kind of awkward. and it can only be played on a certain machine, a turntable, and sort of by scratching on that needle, it creates this electrostatic, and that gets pushed through speakers, and that makes the music or the sound or whatever, right? So like, it's costly, it's expensive, it takes up space, it is kind of cumbersome. You can't do stuff with it. There's limitations. You can't share it with a friend. You can't, easily stop it and pause it and cut it and re-edit it and, put it with a video or whatever. Like, you put that thing on the turntable, you drop the needle, and it just plays the music. And so that's everything that kind of, CDs and then MP3s and then streaming was like, hey, we're doing all these things. It's not. But the appeal suddenly, in an era when you can get any song or album or any music on your phone or in your car or wherever at any time, is those physical limitations that the record has, right? It's big and it's cumbersome, but it has this album sleeve on it. It's something you own. It sits in your home, and you can look at it, and people can come and they can run their fingers around it and peruse the albums and hold them and read them and look at the liner notes and look at the art and contemplate things that are bigger than like a couple pixels on a screen. You put it on, and there is this like physical involvement in the process. That involvement of putting the record, dropping the needle, is like, it engages your body, it engages your mind. And human beings have bodies. We have hands, we have eyes, we have ears. Like, we're more than just the tips of our fingers, which is what we really use when we're using a phone or we're using sort of a computer. And because of that, it's sort of a more involved action, right? It's social. It's social in the sense that, like, if you want to go out and buy a record, you can order a record online from, Discogs or Amazon or, whatever record store you want, your artist's website. You can order one on Spotify. But a lot of people like going to record stores, and record stores have been growing and booming in recent years. And so if you go to a record store where you live, where do you live?
In the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
The Bay Area, right? You go to Amoeba, let's say, or one of the many great record stores in San Francisco, or, I'm Toronto, right? Great city, both excellent cities for record shopping. Like, you go into that store and you spend 20 minutes looking for something with, $40 burning a hole in your pocket, and you're flipping through things, and you're talking to someone, you see someone, you're talking about a show. Like, that's social. That's an activity. That's something you could spend a couple hours on a Sunday afternoon doing. You can't spend a couple hours on a Sunday afternoon perusing Spotify. It's not really a sort of social activity, an activity that takes up time. And so all of these things, which were once seen as the kind of constraints of that analog technology that we needed to break free of with technology, suddenly become the benefits of it. The physicality, the weight of it, the cost of it, the need to go out and sort of procure it and talk to individuals and whatever, like, that becomes its appeal. And I think what you were alluding to is in an era where, like, the default is whatever program is going to be on your phone, whatever app it is, or on your browser, like, that's the same everywhere. Everyone has that. It's no different. There's nothing special about it. It's not like every time you open up Spotify, you're like, ooh, how exciting, right? It's just there in the background, like air. You don't really think about it. And so that contrast suddenly gives it a sense of value and a sense of something that kind of stands alone and is special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's another social aspect to it as well that I was trying to explain to my son. Back in the day, like, getting a new album was almost like a social event. Like, your friends would come over, you'd kind of open it together, you'd pass the liner notes around, and you'd look at the cover art, and some of these were amazing cover art, and flipped open into threefold, and you'd have all this artwork going on, and that part of it was a social event as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you still have that in a way, because that's what happens, right? Like, if you go to a record store in Berkeley or here in Toronto, like, right now there are teenagers who are looking at records and talking about them and holding them, and they may have heard their album already on streaming, but, like, there's still something to that. And that thing is one of the reasons why you see people doing these things, right? I'm always astounded by how many young people in their 20s and even younger I see walking around with film cameras, and they're just like walking around parks, taking photos in the way that I did with, a film camera 30 something years ago. Right. And it's like, that social aspect is is an attraction of it. It's what draws people together. It makes it kind of a tribe. It's like baseball card collecting. Like I know a lot of people who still do that, and kids who still do that, right? And it's again, it's like it almost becomes the excuse for socializing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't think you talk about these words specifically in the book, but there's sort of this trend of this techno-utopia movement, and even transhumanism, and that's kind of the other side of the spectrum of what we're talking about. And that's kind of advocating for a future where technology is like totally integrated in our lives, maybe even in our bodies. What are your thoughts on these movements, and how do they kind of coexist with this trend toward a resurgence of analog?
I think like there has always been that strain of belief in technology that, transcends kind of logical problem solving into a sort of greater belief that like borderlines on faith, right? And I think what we've seen about these things is it's like this. It's kind of there's the two scenarios, right? There's the sort of Terminator Matrix scenario, and there's the techno-utopian transhumanism scenario, whatever movie you sort of go with that, I guess. And it's like both of these are the sort of extremes of like these things that we've created are going to be our salvation or destruction. And the reality is like from everything we've seen, it's like whether it's sort of a small promise, like, the paperless office is going to cure all the problems of productivity in business, or whether it's a sort of larger promise, like, or fear, like, AI will doom us all and we'll be enslaved by the computers, or AI will be our salvation and we will sort of, upload our brains to the cloud and live in the singularity, or whatever Ray Kurzweil is peddling. Like there's almost like a childlike simplicity to this, which I guess, you could say with all sort of messianic faiths in a way, or whatever the opposite would, like a doomsday cult in the other sense, right? And what we've seen time and again is like our expectations are so far ahead of where reality is. And I think you saw this a lot in the pandemic, and this is what I wrote a lot in my book. The second book I've wrote about analog, The Future is Analog, which reflects on the experience of the pandemic, which is like, remember the early beginning days of the pandemic, April 2020, we're all stockpiling masks and bleach, toilet paper, and all the people were like, this is it, we're never going back to an office, this is the beginning, like we're transitioning out of this fully digital thing, and everyone's like being pushed into it, and this is going to be the best thing ever. And now we see it's like everyone's just like swung back the other direction, right? We're like, okay, like fine, I'm talking to you on Zoom, but like I'm not doing this for every single meeting I have. And I want to be able, I'm not ordering from a goddamn QR code menu at a restaurant. I'm not, like there are limits to these things. There are limitations. And I think that absolutism doesn't take into account the natural limitations of like human bodies and the physical world that we live in, right? Which is something that we don't just want to abandon. Like there may be people that do, but like the majority of us don't, right? We actually enjoy having bodies and using them, and the restraints of the physical world, and the limitations of that sort of view as it meets up with reality, which is still like a very physical analog thing.
Yeah, for sure. And you were talking before about analog, old school film cameras and photography years ago. I've been around for a while, and talking about the idea that we digital office, and we'll put all our documents on something, media somehow, or in the cloud now. And I'm sitting here in a room like I can see right now, stacks of paper, stacks of physical books, and all kinds of things. It's like it was a long time ago, and while I do have a lot of things online, it's still pretty phenomenal how much I love having a book and how often we're using paper notebooks.
Well, exactly. And that reflects the reality of it. Like I'm working on something right now for a project, and it's like I got 2 notebooks in front of me, about a bunch of scraps of paper. I got some sticky notes, but then I have like all the stuff that's in my Dropbox of like interviews that I recorded and video things and links to other things and different notes and different formats and a bunch of Word documents and then a bunch of printed out Word documents that I like circled things. And that reflects the sort of messy physical reality of how we live and how we work and how we interact with the world. And it's that same thing. It's like everyone who's out there taking a photo with a film camera is also taking photos with their smartphones. And that just reflects that reality. You know, it's like my daughter who is literally sitting next to me moping because she wants access to my computer. I don't mind her. She is, you know, she will take photos on my phone or my wife's phone, but she'll also, sorry, I'm just going to hand her my phone so she can use it as a calculator because it is a calculator. There you go. She'll also, you know, like take photos with an Instax camera when, you know, we find out where she hid it or lost it. She'll listen to endless streaming of Taylor Swift, but she also has Taylor Swift records, right? And wants nothing more than to see Taylor Swift in person, which is not happening because the tickets cost $4,000. So, you know, again, it's like this reflects the true reality of the future we want to live in, which is, you know, having access to all sorts of tools and technologies that we create in order to make life better, but like still using the things that make sense to us as these physical creatures.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned, you know, talking about young people, and because there's sort of this myth or this meme kind of like, well, as soon as the boomers die off, you know, this analog stuff will go away. But you're seeing this resurgence among young people as well.
Yeah, younger individuals are the ones who are driving it and have been doing it for the better part of 15 years. So initially it was millennial, and now it's Gen, I don't know, whatever. But you know, the boomers are like, no one loves an iPad more than a boomer grandparent. I mean, that's like, it's their greatest love in the world. My parents are, you know, and my mother-in-law, like they're the worst with their phone. They never put them down. And I think it's the difference of people who have seen this technology emerge and it's still this new magical thing. The novelty about it is still so captivating. And the difference of someone who has always grown up with this technology and it's just sort of, it's the norm. It's nothing special. So like, you know, if you've always grown up and photos have always just kind of been snapped at your face from the back of a smartphone or your parent's smartphone, and you've always just been able to sort of tap at that, then suddenly the first time someone gives you, you know, a Polaroid or a Fujifilm Instax camera and you press a button and it makes this click and a sound and this like thing emerges out of it, like birthed like a freaking Tamagotchi egg or a, you know, Hatchimal or whatever toy. And like all of a sudden a photo appears that you can hold on to and tape up on your wall and give to a friend. Like that's magic, right? And they don't care what the resolution is. They don't care that a camera has like 12 or 20 or 30 or 100 megapixels or whatever it is. Like it's the magic is like that. What's new to them? What's novel? So I think it's the novelty of each technology is different for each generation.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, another thing, you know, this idea that somehow technology can solve all of our problems, you know, poverty, disease, all these things. You know, you talk about in the book how there's also, digital also creates inequality. Like not everyone benefits from these technological advancements.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I think it's just the simple truth of it is like digital just exacerbates and accelerates ongoing trends, whether that's trends in style and fashion, whether it's something like a food trend, it just makes it move louder and quicker and spread more widely, or whether it's, you know, horribly insidious things like the rise of, you know, neo-fascism or, you know, a genocide that's being promoted on social media or something like that. Or, you know, economic trends or something, you know, it doesn't tend to be this great leveler in the way that's always predicted. It tends to, again, exacerbate existing social, economic, and political forces that are out there in the world.
Right. You know, and it's pretty clear that over the last, you know, 30 plus years or 30-ish years, at least, that it's actually created, it's been a big factor in this kind of division that we have of the haves and have-nots too, because like, yeah, I mean, it did create the internet. All these things have created vast wealth, but it's isolated to certain regions and certain segments of the population. It's like not everybody in Nebraska has benefited.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a benefit from everybody having internet access, right? In some sort of way. Like there's a benefit to that. There's a benefit to people having access to things like smartphones. But again, if you look at the great economic and social sort of growth, it's those factors have not limited. And if anything, it's the exacerbated existing trends and inequalities. So whether it's like broadband usage or the numbers of startup that gets funding, it's like you can track it to like, well, more people who get startups are white men who went to these 5 universities in these 4 cities or whatever. Like it's like, yes, the promise, the potential is that everybody would sort of do it, but the existing structures that exist and are there are just reinforced by this. Something, whether it's like cryptocurrency or whether it's startups or whether it's any of the sort of, again, potential benefits from the technology. It's again just it tends to reinforce structures that are existing, and it doesn't mean that the technology makes it worse in any inherent way. It's just another tool that gets put through the society that we live in. And so the idea that that tool would suddenly just like level out the playing field and take care of these things was a pretty naive fantasy.
Well, and people are still holding on to those fantasies now. And like I say, there's a bit of a resurgence of that idea too.
It's a great sales pitch. Listen, and again, that's this utopian thing where it's like, how do we, education's a great one, right? It's like there are inequalities in education, within a city like San Francisco, within a city like Toronto, within a country like the United States, within, the world, between countries and continents. How do you try to change that inequality that is like the biggest determinant of social mobility? There's policy, there's this, there's taxes, there's the way that funding is done, there's studies about the different methods of education you can have, and blah, 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 right? Or everybody will have access to online tools and computers in the classroom, and that will mean every student will get the same thing. Oh, that's a really good solution. I like that one. And I can give away iPads as a politician and like get my photo in the paper and show that I'm being innovative. Great. I'm going to choose that one. And so it is this beautiful magic bullet. It's sexy. It's salesy. It's something that, it's like there's a toy at the end of it. And that's an easy thing for people to sell, and an easy sort of pitch for people to make that, whether it's a politician saying that they're going to, give access to technology to schools or young people or people in underprivileged communities, or whether it's a CEO saying that they're going to, totally revitalize their company by becoming the most digitally forward and innovative. Like it's like this easy way out that people just kind of are like, oh, great. Well, that sounds like a, completely benign and only positive thing. But the devil's in the detail.
Right. Well, and I talking about the pandemic, I kind of remember when universities were somehow kind of simultaneously try to market the idea that you can get just as good of an education sort of online, and that's why we're going to still charge you the same amount. But don't forget, we have this wonderful campus and all these things that make us even better. It's like, okay, which one are you selling me?
Exactly. And it's, again, there's this incentive. It's like, we want to be seen as innovative. What's the most, it's like the shortcut to innovative, the sort of the part that plays well on social media, right? Is like, we're going to have devices and we're going to have drones. And I remember this was a couple of years ago. I was doing volunteer work with the Toronto Public Library, like in their foundation. They had the head of the foundation on, or the head of the library on. She was talking about they're so innovative, and look at all we have coding and we have drones, and it's like, what is the drone for? It's like, well, we really just use it to take photos of the libraries, but like, isn't that great? Aren't we so innovative? And someone I remember put their hands up and they're like, what about books? And it's like, yes, of course, like 87% of what we do is still books. But look at the drone, and people are like, oh, well, that's you're innovative, you're thinking of the future, so we'll cut you a check, right? And it just becomes this, and then like the drone sits empty. And the library still needs more books and more spaces for books and more spaces for people to read and more safe spaces for kids to read in underprivileged neighborhoods, right? Like, but that's not innovative, or it's not seen as innovative in the same way that like a toy or a flying thing or a QR code or something.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's one thing you talk about in the book, that we sort of have a value problem of we don't value certain kinds of things. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I think we value things in different ways. And I think it's very easy to sort of ascribe a value to a thing that's based on like a quantitative measurement of things, right? Digital technology is numbers at the end of the day. And so it's very easy to like focus on the data, look at the numbers. It's easy to sort of do that and value it in this way because it seems transparent. It seems like that's forward thinking. And yet when you think about your own life, whether it's your personal life, your family life, your work life, professional life, like things that give you the greatest value are not quantified as easily, whether it's, relationships and the love you have, which is like the most important social determinant of your health, right? Your social health, your physical health, whether it's health and the health of the environment around you, right? Like it's that's again, like it's a very qualitative thing. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the climate, the stability of the climate you're living in. And I think things like work, where it's like, the satisfaction with your career or the sense that you're doing work that's worthy, or the company or the institution you're working with, or the field you're working in is doing stuff that's innovative or worthwhile. Like, again, that's not as easily quantified. And I think, the value of analog is qualitative, right? Like when people talk about why, they've done surveys of like why people, especially younger people, continue to buy paper books, 10-1 to ebooks, right? Like the ebook market, like it grows, but it has not replaced paper books by any measure. If you go into a bookstore, they're still slinging paper, right? And people are like, well, why is it? What, like these things are so much lighter, they're so much cheaper, they work great. Ebooks are fabulous, but people still want, 9 out of 10 people still want a paper book. And they say it's the smell, it's the feel, right? It's like you can't quantify that. You can give all the logical reasons why, but humans are just not logical creatures. We're not computers, right? We're not Vulcans. Like if we're going to get really nerdy, like we're not Spock. We're, oh my God.
Or Dr. McCoy.
We're clones, damn it. I was about to say Picard, but right, I got my seasons mixed up. So we're irrational, we're emotional. That's what makes the human experience what it is. And again, I think it's like, but we try to place our value. We're told to place our value on things that are quantifiable, and most of the stuff that's important in our life is. And I think that's again this sort of endearing draw to analog spaces, analog experiences, analog goods it reflects that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I say, I mean, I think that the pandemic brought this out a lot. Like maybe we didn't appreciate a lot of those things as much until we didn't have them anymore.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, that was the last book I wrote was really all about that, right? It was like, okay, the predictions for many years by people down the road for you, down the bay, was that, in the future, we're going to live in this magical time when at the touch of your finger or a mention of your voice, you can have everything brought to your door or into your house by a screen. You want the best food from the best restaurants and the best exercise classes and the best entertainment and a cocktail party with your friends from all over the world and shopping and every sort of experience you have, like you will not need to get up. You will literally not need to like sit up from the sweatpants you had delivered. Like that is it. You want to pray, you want to sing in a karaoke thing. Like you don't need to go anywhere. And then that was it. It was presented to us like within a 3-week period.
Right.
And we were like, wow, this is so cool. And then after a week, someone's like, should we do a Zoom cocktail party? And you're like, I will kill you if you ever say those words again. Right? Like, this is hell. Get me out of here. Like, all I want to do is like have a drink at the dive bar. And like, it's like, I just want to, like, I remember like the first time I went to synagogue for like a bar mitzvah again. I was like, oh, praise be. And I'm like, after an hour, I'm like, okay, this is still boring. But, at least I was like, for the person, I'm like, but at least I'm here. At least I'm bored in person. My ass is like numb on this wooden, synagogue seat, like for a reason. And I think that's it. It's like that we sort of got a glimpse at that, some version of that utopian future. And it was really, left wanting. And the percentage of people who are like still, like the percentage of students that are going to school remotely who don't have some sort of health problem that keeps them from it, it's like around the world is, insignificantly nothing. Most companies and organizations are back in the office at least a good chunk of the time, right? Like stores are full. You go into stores there, you go into a grocery store, like it's, I was in a grocery store this morning. Like I waited in line with those groceries. And why is that? Because again, like we tried the other way, and yeah, we're still ordering. Ordered a couple of things online yesterday, but like the experience of the analog way of doing things, the value of it is still there. And if anything, it's been highlighted why it matters, right? We understand that more.
Yeah, and and I think throughout the conversation, it's always been a balance, right? I mean, like you say, your daughter uses digital photos and analog photos, so nobody's saying I think you throw one or the other out, but I think that's what it is figuring out what that balance is, and because like you say before, some of this technology does have great value. Like, okay, I can't have this meeting with this person that's 3,000 miles away, but I can do a Zoom, right? So it does have value in these kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think the thing is like everyone is figuring out what that balance is day to day, right? We're really struggling for that balance. We're trying to figure it out, and I think that's what we're going to continue to wrestle with for eternity, right? I don't think there's this tipping point that comes where all of a sudden like digital just like that's it, just we're done with all the rest of this stuff. No more paper, no more physical goods, no more, eating in restaurants. Like you would hear that from people with the pandemic, with the technologists who were predicting this change, months later. It's like, well, what do you think about this now? They're like, well, it's just, the technology is just not there. But if it gets, if we just get the AI or the metaverse, the virtual reality, then it's going to be good. It's like, no, the reason there's an inherent thing that's missing here, and that thing is the physical human experience, right? Like we are flesh and blood creatures that are physically present on the earth. That's a truth. That's an eternal truth. And so it's always going to be, those needs are always going to push up against whatever technology that, we can invent will deliver, because those physical needs still have tremendous value and meaning. And it's hard to put your finger on like, well, what is the value of me going to this meeting and sitting in this boardroom or sitting at this restaurant with this person and talking to them? What's the value it's going to cost? If I got to fly to New York for a meeting and I got to, go, like it's going to cost, $2,000 for that 2 days that I got to be there to the company. And it's going to cost X amount of time and and couldn't this just be a call? And it's like, well, you have to make that decision. You have to make that call. And sometimes the answer is very clearly, yeah, we could just do a 5-minute phone call. And sometimes the answer is very clear, like, no, this needs to be in person. And then the rest of it is this gray zone of figuring out, which is what we're doing in all sorts of different aspects of our lives. And like, if we decide to go back away from something, and move it to more of an analog thing, technology in schools, for example, right? Instead of giving every kid a laptop, maybe we're having kids share them. Maybe there's certain classes in schools or ages where it's not appropriate. Like if we learn from experience where it works and where it doesn't, that's evolution. That's the correct way to use technology. Right. And if we're blindly just going towards this future that we told ourselves, like everything will be digital, that's, just foolishness.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah. So you mentioned a few things, but finally, so what's next? What's next for you? What new projects are you working on? And
I don't have anything new in this realm. I'm working on some other projects, helping other people write their books as a ghostwriter, which has been interesting for the first time ever. I kind of feel like an AI in a way because I have to inhabit the mind of some other sentient creature. But this is stuff that I keep thinking about, and I keep it. It just keeps coming back because every generation's, every year there's some new technology, and it seems like a new story, right? The AI is like the latest. It's like some new story about what do you think about this? And it's like, the response is still the same, right? It's like there's this like fundamental continuity of we're going to create new technologies and they'll be incredibly powerful and they'll create opportunity, create problems. Good things will happen and bad things will happen, but like the fundamental needs of human beings remain the same. As long as that continues, we're going to be drawn to things that meet those needs, and a lot of those needs are these physical, real, tangible things that digital technology will have little or nothing to do with.
Yeah, where it just can't be a decent substitute.
Exactly.
Well, David Sachs, thank you so much for coming on our program, and I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you. I hope my outrage was significant enough to make the cut of the show.
Well, I mean, part of our thing is lowering the temperature, so.
Oh, God. Digital technology will help with that. Remember that? It's like, it'll usher in the commons, and all of us will speak and debate in the most democratic terms. And now, a thing called Twitter.
Yeah. Well, and with each cycle we did that, we made that same mistake. I mean, radio, television, all these things, the internet, Google, all these things. The
printing press will turn orators into gentlemen.
Yeah. Right. Instead, we had like 150 years of wars. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to find an excuse. It's like toddlers. Like they'll find an excuse to fight. They'll find it. You can give all you want. So enjoy the ride.
Exactly. All right. Well, I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, David. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye.
And that is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. If you enjoyed this episode, if you found it interesting, please tell some friends about it. Post it to your social media. Better yet, text someone. Even better, talk to someone in real life. Tell them about this show. I really appreciate it. Okay, see you in a week or two.